As we're going to be talking about Abraham today, and Abraham is this guy who I just think is always talking about how old he was and how incredible his story was. But there's incredible stories here, right? And we have, with Abraham's story, we basically start when he was age 75, but for these times, right, 75 is a little bit later in life, right? And there is a wealth of wisdom and experiences when you talk to someone that has lived a full life, and some of the stories that they can tell and share about God's faithfulness in their life, God's hesed in their life. And so, again, encouraging those relationships between our youth and our adults and the wisdom that can be shared in both directions there. So, again, just encouraging you to again, continue to have conversations that you're already doing with some of the other older members of our church as well. And as I mentioned, right, we are continuing this series. We're in the book of Genesis, and we're doing these various character studies. And we started with creation and what God reveals about himself in creation, and we looked at the story of Adam and Eve and the contrast between Cain and Abel. And we looked at Noah last year, and so we're moving forward with Abraham this week. And so just to kind of bridge that gap, right, when we talked about Noah, it was this despair because the world was so full of sin. It was just so saturated with sin that God said, I'm going to wipe it out. But he spared Noah, he spared his 3 sons and their wives, basically these 8 people, along with the animals that were spared in the ark. And so God promised he'd make that covenant. He says, I'm not going to do this again. In spite of your sin, I'm not going to destroy the world. And he gave the same command that we had earlier in Genesis, be fruitful and multiply. And so they're all in that same place, right? And the one story kind of leapfrogging over was that Tower of Babel story, because they were all in the same place and they were all working together, which sounds like a good thing, right? But they were doing it for their own glory. They were building that big old city and the big old tower. Let's make a name for ourselves. And God says, no, that's not going to happen. And he confused their language and spread that out. So we have a map here that we can see the descendants of Shem, Ham, and Japheth, the 3 sons of Noah. So you may not be able to read the words, but you can see the colors, right? So the pinkish reddish on the top there, those were all the descendants of Japheth that went north, both east and west, all through that region. And the green area was the descendants of Ham. All I can think of is green eggs and ham because it's green. But Ham was the one that was cursed, that Noah said, cursed be Ham because of the shameful thing that he did. And again, there's a little box there that basically shows all the different tribes that were in the land of Canaan, all the Canaanites. And so those were descendants of Ham, but Noah said, cursed be Ham, and they will serve the descendants of Shem. And Shem is that yellow part, that's modern-day Saudi Arabia, and that's where Abram was descended from, right? So Noah was 10 from Adam to Noah was 10 generations, and then Abram was 10 generations past Noah. And we also talked about ages, right? When God said he was tired of man's days, and so he said they're not going to live to be these 900 years anymore. You can see this progression of ages. They were all kind of pretty leveled off right around that 900 range there. And then there was this gradual, it wasn't this immediate drop off because they had to populate the earth, right? They had to live a little bit longer. But again, sometimes when we read some things in the Bible, some people are skeptical. It's like, well, those numbers just seem outrageous, right? But there are biologists and there are geneticists, and they look at what causes this. There's actually science behind it. They say, okay, you went from this huge population of people with this massive gene pool, and you just narrowed it down to 8 people, right? And they call it a bottlenecking, and it says that when you do that, then it has a detrimental effect on the lifespan of whatever those living beings are, and in this case it was humans, right? And there's even math involved here. If you look at the next slide, which actually shows that they wrote an equation, right, to show that there's this best fit line, right? So some of you school have done best fit lines, right? And there's the middle one is the actual equation, but then there's an upper boundary and a lower boundary, and it fits within this range. But this organization called Genesis Apologetics, and so what they did is they look at all these ages and show that these are not just random things that people made up. It actually follows a mathematical pattern and can be predicted very accurately. And you can't see it in the corner there, but it shows the R-squared value. So if you're math people, you know, well, the R-squared value tells you how accurate that equation is. And a perfect accuracy is 1. If it has an accuracy of 1, that means every point is exactly on the curve. And this is a 0.95, which is a really high. This is a really high number. So again, again, a reminder that these are just not ridiculous fairy tales that were made up. Science and math back it up, which is why we don't shy away from people's questions like, oh, that's ridiculous. They're like, no. There's people that have looked deeply into this, and they see that. And they see that pattern, and it's not just some made-up stories that we read about. And speaking of age, right, we talked about how Abraham, it was always about his age, how he was so old, he was 75, right? But remember, he lived to be 175. And so if you take that number, if you take 75 out of 175 and do the math, and I did, right, it's between 42 and 43%. It's like 42.8 something percent, right? If you look at the average lifespan of people today, which we rounded off to about 80, right? You take that percentage of 80, that puts them around 34, right, relatively speaking. So if you really think 70 was like the new 30 for Abraham, right? So we do want to look at it from that perspective that yes, he had lived a long time, and yes, it was becoming less and less likely for him to become a father. But the idea that he had a lot of life left in him, right? And that's what God called him to. And that's what we're reading about, is the call that God put on his life. So we will be reading from Genesis chapter 12, verses 1 through 9. You can follow the Bibles, all the words will be on the screen here as well. So Genesis 12, 1 through 9. Now the Lord said to Abram, "Go from your country and your kindred and your father's house to the land that I will show you. And I will make of you a great nation, and I will bless you and make your name great, so that you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and him who dishonors you I will curse. And in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed." So Abram went, as the Lord had told him, and Lot went with him. Abram was 75 years old when he departed from Haran. And Abram took Sarai his wife, and Lot his brother's son, and all their possessions that they had gathered, and the people that they had acquired in Haran, and they set out to go to the land of Canaan. When they came to the land of Canaan, Abram passed through the land to the place at Shechem, to the oak of Moreh. At that time the Canaanites were in the land. Then the Lord appeared to Abram and said, "To your offspring I will give this land." So he built there an altar to the Lord who had appeared to him. From there he moved to the hill country on the east of Bethel and pitched his tent, with Bethel on the west and Ai on the east. And there he built an altar to the Lord and called upon the name of the Lord. And Abram journeyed on, still going toward the Negev. Let's pray. Holy God, we thank you for the recorded stories, so many different people, and how your love, your hesed, endures. That we see examples of people that had faith in you and followed you, but ultimately it is about your faithfulness. So we ask that your words may be spoken and heard and understood this morning. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. So there's a phrase that sometimes people use that I've found my calling. I found my calling. And usually when I hear it, people are just joking around. Like, I've heard that you can actually get a job as a taste tester for Ben & Jerry's. I think I've found my calling, right? Or there's video game testers that just play video games all day. That sounds like my calling. Or the people that do video blogs or just do blogs on the internet about traveling all of these exotic places, and then that's how they make their money by traveling. It's like, that sounds like my calling, right? But the theme of all those things is selfishness, and it's about their desire and what they think will make them happy, and so that's what they think their calling is. But even people outside the church will use that. They'll say, yeah, this is my calling. You know, I became a teacher, and I just really feel that this is where I'm supposed to be, or I became a nurse, and yeah, I just feel like this is my purpose, this is my calling in life. And so if you hear that, you know, I guess that's a good conversation starter. It's like, well, being called by who? Right? Are you being, you know, because if sometimes you use that phrase, it's like, well, who are you being called by, right? And clearly Abram was being called by God, and we believe that our calling comes from God and not from the world and not from ourselves. It's not about advancing our own agenda, right? So Abram's call was to go where he was going to show him. It was basically finishing what his father had started. If we just go back to the previous chapter, to chapter 11, I just put my list here to remind me where I'm at. Genesis 11, right? And this is where his father Terah took Abram, his son, and Lot, the son of Haran, his grandson, and Sarai, his daughter-in-law, his son Abram's wife, and they went forth together from Ur of the Chaldeans to go into the land of Canaan. But when they came to Haran, they settled there. And of course, that's where Terah died. He lived to 230, I believe it says there. And that's where the story stopped for him. And if we look at the next slide over to, there's another map there that shows the path that they took. So again, you can't see the words there, but you can kind of see the pathway, right? So down in that bottom right corner, that's where Ur is located. And so Abram, along with his father and with Lot, and again, Lot was with them because Lot's father had died, and so Lot was part of that household, and that's the reason that he was going along with them. But they went all the way up to that far peak up there to Haran, but that's where the story ended for Abram's father, Terah, right? And that's where God appeared to Abram and said, okay, you're going to go, you're going to remove yourself from the rest of your father's household and go down to that land of Canaan. So we see that pathway heading all the way down along the coast of the Mediterranean Sea again into the land of Canaan. And when he got there, right, God reinforced the fact, yes, this is the land. This is the land that your descendants will inherit. He didn't say you, he said his descendants. And he responds appropriately. He responds by building an altar to the Lord. And then he continues on because, again, the land was already occupied by the Canaanites at that time. And then he goes down between Bethel and Ai, and he builds another altar to the Lord, and he calls upon the name of the Lord. Again, an appropriate response to God's call on his life. He obeys and he goes through it, and you can see how the path goes down to Egypt, and then it comes back up into the valley area there. But yeah, this lifespan that we see Abraham, and it was an eventful life. And like I said, we pick up his story when he was 75. So the timeline, I could put it on one screen, but couldn't see it. You still can't really read that very well. But there was a lot of things in Abraham's life, right? And there's a lot. You could basically do a whole series probably of all the different story plot lines that happened throughout the life of Abraham. But it was not all peaches and pie in the sky, right? He obeyed God, and he's known as a hero of the faith for good reason. He did some things incredibly well in being faithful to God and obeying God and being humble. And he also stumbled and messed up some things, right? And he stepped in it a few times, right? And so like I said, when he went down into Egypt, when there was famine, they were trying to avoid the famine. And what does he do? He just was calling upon the name of the Lord, and he goes down to Egypt and says, hey, tell him you're my sister, right? Because you're way too beautiful, and the Pharaoh's going to have me killed and take you for himself. So just say you're my sister. And I'm sure he's rationalizing that, saying, well, she's my half-sister, right? Which I know sounds weird, right? So he married his half-sister, but again, those are things that were not a weird thing at the time. So yes, Sarai was his half-sister. Terah was the father, but to a different mother. So this idea that, well, if we tell them that you're a sister, we're not exactly lying, but we all know that when you hold back some of the truth, half-truths are lies, and it's deception. And it did not go well, right? And the curses that came down, the plagues that came down on the Pharaoh at that time. And then, again, this evil act, and yet God still used it to prosper Abram. And Pharaoh ended up giving him gifts and said, just go away, just go. Right? And so there was times when Abram didn't get it right. And there's other times where he did, right? After they left Egypt and they go back into the Negev, right? And then there's this quarrel, there's an argument, and there's infighting because they had a good problem. The problem was they were too rich, right? So Abram's flocks and herds and shepherds and those that belonged to Lot, they were starting to bicker and fight over land. And Abram, even though Abram is the elder statesman of his household, right? He tells Lot, he's like, you know what, you pick. which way you want to go. You pick and I'll go the other way, and we'll separate and we'll keep peace in our family. Again, that's unheard of, right? Especially in that culture, right? That he would actually give up that right and give it to Lot. And of course, Lot is not dumb. He picks what looks like the better land and ends up living in part of the city of Sodom. And again, we'll hear more about that later. But yeah, another story that happened there where Abram shows himself to be honorable is that there were 5 armies that actually gathered together, allied together, and they came to attack Sodom, and they carried off a lot of things, including Lot and his whole household and all his possessions. And Abram comes to the rescue, right? He comes to the rescue with 318 trained men. So there's two extremes you can look at. So from just the possessions aspects, like he owned 318 trained people in his household. That kind of speaks to his vast wealth. But then on the other side, it's like, okay, he chased after the armies of 5 kings with 318 men. That again, extreme in the other direction. But again, God's faithfulness, God's said in that, and he had success, and he brought back Lot and all his possessions. And so again, we see times where Abraham gets it right, we see times where Abraham gets it wrong. And God reminds him that yes, you are going to be a great nation, and the world's going to be blessed through you. And again, it's been years since he first mentioned it back when he was 75, and it's like, okay, well, he kind of starts to push back a little bit and says, well, I don't even have a son yet. How am I supposed to be the father of a great nation if I don't even have a son yet? My slave is going to inherit my household. And he says, no, you're going to have a son. And to make it, to basically add a level of seriousness to it, that's where the sacrifice happened. And he told Abram to take a heifer and a goat and a ram and cut them all in half, and one half on one side, one half on the other side, and also a pigeon and a turtle dove on either side, and the blood would run down in between. And most of the explanations for this is that this kind of covenant was made so that they would walk through, and that was a sign that if they didn't live up to their part of the bargain, that this is what would happen, that they would be slaughtered like these animals. And Abram's not the one that walked through, right? Abram has the vision of the fire pot and the torch that actually walked through, symbolizing that God is saying, this is how serious I am about this. You are going to be a father to a son, and it is going to create a great nation. And of course, that's when we read about this is the famous line that Abraham believed him, and it was credited to him as righteousness. And so, again, his life continues on, and again, he starts to say, okay, well, yes, God's going to make this happen, but it hasn't happened the way I thought it was going to happen. It hasn't happened in the timeline that I thought it was going to happen. So this is where he missed steps. And he and Sarah both agreed that, okay, in that culture, it actually was kind of an expected thing. If a woman was barren and didn't bring forth sons for her husband, then the servant, right? So Hagar was offered up to become a wife of Abraham. Maybe this is how God is going to make it happen. And how often do we think that we say, okay, yeah, we feel we're doing what we're supposed to, and this is what God's going to do, and the timing doesn't seem to be happening the way we thought, and then we start to get creative rather than submitting, and this is exactly what Abraham and Sarai did as well. They said, well, this is obviously what God is going to happen. It has to happen this way, because it's not happening the way we thought. And again, there's all kinds of drama. We're not going to get into all that drama. There's a ton of drama that happens then, right? He has this son Ishmael with Hagar, and then the bickering and the fighting between Hagar and Sarai, and between Ishmael and Isaac is born, right? Again, being impatient with God's timing. And again, because that was, 85 about when he was, 86, I think, when Ishmael was born. So it had been 10 years. And it's a long time after that where God comes again and says, no, you are going to have, Ishmael is not the one. You still have a son coming. And now you're going to do something to prove that you're in this game as well. Do I say have some skin in the game, right? Where he has to circumcise himself, right? And circumcise all the men in his household to show that he is serious about this agreement as well. And he's visited by three men, and they say two of them angels. One of them is the incarnation of God, Jesus. Jesus, is God incarnate. So that's what he's visited by. And again, this is where Abram shines, and he does this incredible, shows this incredible hospitality. And he says, well, let me make you a small meal. And he makes this elaborate meal, and he sits there and waits while they eat. And that's when they tell him, like, no, you're almost there, right? Isaac is coming. In another year, Isaac is coming. And they also share with the idea of Lot being destroyed. And so I think that's on the next slide, or not Lot, Sodom is going to be destroyed. And so he intercedes, right? Because he has this working relationship with God. He's been through all these things where God has sustained him and God has shown himself faithful. That he actually has this comfort level where he can know, he can go to God and say, God, is this really what you want to do, is wipe out this entire city? And then again, there's you said earlier that he lies about Sarah being his wife. It happens again in Gerar when they head out that way. And he again tells them, hey, let's do the sister act thing again. And I don't mean the movies, right? Or the singing nuns. Let's pretend. Let's fake this. And again, it creates all kinds of problems. And in spite of all that, God's faithfulness still comes through. Right? Isaac is born when he's 100 years old. And yeah, it's, again, of course, the drama with Ishmael, and how Ishmael has to go away. And yes, Ishmael will be blessed as well, but Isaac is the one. Isaac is the one that your line will lead to King David and Jesus eventually down the line. And all nations will be blessed through him. And that's really the pinnacle of the story, right? When we think of Abraham, then that's where we really think of, probably the story we think of most, is Abraham being called to sacrifice his son. Sacrifice the son that he loves, Isaac, right? And so if you just read that story, you're like, oh, wait a minute, come on now. This sounds ridiculous, right? But if you look at the entire timeline, how Abraham was brought along on this journey where God's faithfulness showed true, and he was faithful to God and obedient to God, and a little bit here, a little bit here, and it continued to escalate to the point where Abraham believed that, yes, I tried to do things in my timeline. I tried to do the things the way I thought God was going to do it. So yes, I'm going to obey God because everything he said has been true. And so yes, we look at the story of Abram/Abraham, but it's really about God's faithfulness. It's really about God's covenant that he made. And yes, he started off with just go to the place I'm going to show you. And then he escalated that covenant when he made the sacrifice. And that's, again, we talk about, that's when it was said in Genesis 15:6. That quote, we have the next slide for that, Genesis 15. And he believed the Lord, and he counted it to him as righteousness. So again, the key I want to point out here is not what Abraham did. It is what Abraham believed. Right? And again, it's the same story for us. It is not about what we do. We are not about being the elder brother and saying, we do this, we do this, we do this. We serve here, we serve there. Therefore, we're good. No, it's about what Abraham believed. And that's what was credited to him as righteousness. It was about his faith. And we also see again how he was gradually brought through that sacrifice area, and then again with where he had to actually circumcise himself, and that's when his name was changed actually as well, right? When he was 99, and so your name is no longer Abram, it will be Abraham. And when they added that extra root to his name changed from being High Father, where that extra root now meant multitude. So yes, he was still High Father, but now he's High Father of a multitude. And again, Isaac happened shortly after that. But yeah, this idea of why God is asking of this is because he knows that Abram's going to follow through. It is not, there's no doubt in God's mind about what's going to happen. And we also have a passage from Genesis 22 here. In the context of this was when he was visited by Jesus and the two angels, and the angel of the Lord called. Actually, I'm going to take that back. This is the intervening when he was asked to sacrifice Isaac, right? And God intervenes, and the angel of the Lord called to Abraham a second time from heaven and said, "By myself I have sworn, declares the Lord, because you have done this, because you have done this, and have not withheld your son, your only son, I will surely bless you, and I will surely multiply your offspring as the stars of heaven, and as the sand that is on the seashore. And your offspring shall possess the gate of his enemies. And in your offspring shall all the nations of the earth be blessed, because you have obeyed my voice. Right? So we referenced Noah earlier, right? And the covenant that God gave Noah, there was no strings attached. It's like, I'm not going to destroy the earth again. And with Abram, it was kind of this escalation, and it was just, okay, now this is what I'm going to do. You just need to go. And he again brought them along with these little step-by-step to the point where now he's asking them to sacrifice his son. So it's like, okay, well, there was conditions there, right? And it clearly says, because you have obeyed, that's why I'm surely going to do this. So is the covenant guaranteed, or is the covenant dependent on the obedience of Abraham? Right? And when you have a tough question, you go to someone with more wisdom than you. So I went to John Piper to answer this question. And his answer to that question about, is it guaranteed, or is it dependent, or is it conditional? And his answer is yes. Right? Yes and. Right? Chuck would love that. Yes and. Right? And this is the reason why. He references Ezekiel. In Ezekiel, this is actually referencing when God was speaking to the nation of Israel because of their rebellion and their constantly turning to other gods. And this is his response to them, where he starts off and he says, I will sprinkle clean water on you, and you shall be clean from all your uncleannesses, and from all your idols I will cleanse you. And I will give you a new heart, and a new spirit I will put within you, and I will remove the heart of stone from your flesh, and give you a heart of flesh. And this was the focus, this was the kicker here. I will put my spirit within you, and cause you to walk in my statutes, and be careful to obey my rules. Right? So the submission from John Piper then is, God has the ability to put his spirit into Abraham, knowing to give Abraham the strength, the equipping to follow through with his command. Because again, when you read that story and you say, there is no way, if I was in that story, that I could do that. I could not follow through with that. And again, it's about the journey. It was not just this one-time event, like all of a sudden out of the blue, right? It was God's faithfulness throughout his life, and he was chosen for that purpose. And that's where we read Genesis 18 from when he was visited by the three men. And God said, for I have chosen him, that he may command his children and his household after him to keep the way of the Lord by doing righteousness and justice, so that the Lord may bring to Abraham what he has promised him. Right? So God is equipping Abraham to do this, and again, not just for his sake, but for the sake of the generations that are following, which is why we talk about the connection between the multi-generational things that go on in this church body as well. That it is not just about that lifetime, it's about what's coming next, and faithfulness to extend and to communicate God's chesed and God's faithfulness to the next generation as well. And this is where a lot of the Jewish people got it wrong, and this is why it's addressed in the New Testament, or even Jesus in John 8 had to have the arguments with people that the Jews were saying, hey, we're descendants of Abraham. Abraham is our father. We have 23andMe, or we have Ancestry.com, and we've traced it back. Abraham is our ancestor. We're good to go. Right? And Jesus is like, no. Right? If you're Abraham's children, you would be doing the works that Abraham did. Right? Abraham showed himself faithful because his actions reflected what he believed. It wasn't just lip service. And Paul addressed it as well in Galatians, where he says, know then that it is those of faith who are the sons of Abraham. And he continues on, and the scripture, foreseeing that God would justify the Gentiles by faith, preached the gospel beforehand to Abraham, saying, in you shall all the nations be blessed. So then those who are of faith are blessed along with Abraham, the man of faith. Which points to what? That we are sons and daughters of Abraham because of our faith in Jesus Christ. What Abraham did, again, this fantastical, eventful life that was messy, up, getting things right, getting things wrong, was just, again, a way for us to see God's hesed, God being faithful, God's enduring faithfulness and love, steadfast love for both Abraham and for now for us. But us, our relationship with Jesus Christ, right? With Abraham, it was God that made the promises. It was God that kept the promises. And it was God that made Abraham capable to fulfill his part. And for us, it is Jesus Christ. Jesus Christ is the one that lived the life that we couldn't. Jesus Christ died the death that we deserved. He conquered the death that we could not conquer by rising from the grave. He ascended gloriously into heaven, and he's the one that sent the Holy Spirit to live within us, to give us the strength, to equip us to live a life of service, not only to Jesus Christ, but to each other. So, again, this life of Abraham, and it's a great story. And again, it's messy. But we have life stories. And our life stories are messy. But I trust that Jesus Christ is a part of that story. And there are things that Jesus Christ has done in your life that has made your life different, that has given your life purpose. And you realize that God's plan for me is better than the plans that I have for myself. Because you can talk to people about, I've heard the story of Abraham, and they're like, yeah, the guy that was told to kill his son, yeah, no thank you. I don't want to hear that story. But if you tell them your story, if you tell them how God is working in your life, that's what's going to connect to people. That's what makes people realize that, okay, no, this person actually is really into this. They really believe this, and this is real for them. Why is it so real to them? Because Jesus has done things in our lives that makes it that we recognize the trueness of it, the goodness of it, and the beauty of it. And so that's what is our calling? Our calling, yes, is to be disciples of Christ. And it's also to share our story, with others, and to recognize that, yes, we have opportunities to share that. And if you are searching your life and you're not seeing that, well, I don't know if I see how Jesus is working in my life, then talk to someone who has. Talk to someone that does recognize Jesus working in their life and see what that looks like, and maybe get advice from them. It's like, oh, I never thought of that. Yeah, that has happened to me. Yes, Jesus Christ is working in my life. And yes, I do recognize that it is all Jesus. That Jesus made the promise, and Jesus fulfilled the promise, and Jesus is coming back for us again. This is where our purpose is. This is what our call is. And this is where we find joy. Right? True joy is when you're able to share it with somebody else. Right? Which is why I invite people over to watch the football game in the hope against hope that the team's going to win. Right? Because it's more fun if you can celebrate it with other people. And it's less painful when there's other people to share your pain as well. Right? But yes, right? We're called to be a body. We're called to be brothers and sisters in Christ, and to come alongside each other and to listen to each other's story and invest in each other's story, which is why we have small groups, so that we can live life well and live it together and support each other in that, and so that we have the courage to go and to share those stories with people outside of the church that desperately are looking for the light of Christ, because life is just living them unfulfilled. So I encourage you to share your story and recognize that your story is fantastic. It's not written about in the Bible, but your life has purpose and it has meaning, and it was meant to be shared with others. Let's pray. Holy God, we thank you for your faithfulness, for your hesed, that we read about in the life of Abraham, that you carried him through times that when we look at it, we think there is no way a person can do that. And yet through faith in you, through faith in your Son, Jesus Christ, we realize that, yes, that there are things that we are called to do that maybe we realize, I don't know if I can do that. But we know that you are the one that puts the Spirit within us to give us the strength to obey. And that's what we put our faith in. Our faith is in you and not in our own strength. So Lord, open our eyes for those opportunities to share our story and to point people to the hope and the joy that we have in Jesus.